Seeker of Knowledge, The Man Who Deciphered Egyptian Hieroglyphs by James Rumford. In 1802, when Champollion was 11 years old, he vowed to be the first person to read Egypt's ancient hieroglyphs. Then came the challenges of the next 20 years as he searched for the elusive key to the mysterious writing and the fulfilment of his dreams. Along the Nile River, the ibis bird uses its long curved bill to search for food. In ancient Egypt, the ibis was sacred to the god Thoth, who also had a long curved bill. But instead of searching for food, Thoth searched for knowledge. According to legend, Thoth gave the ancient Egyptians pictures to use for writing. With the gift of writing, the Egyptians became seekers of knowledge too. For 3,000 years, the Egyptians wrote about their world, covering their temples with words, filling their libraries with books. Then invaders came and destroyed Egypt, and the pictures called hieroglyphs were forgotten. In 1790, a French boy named Jean-Francois Champollion was born. When he was 7, his older brother told him about General Napoleon, the great leader of France, who was in Egypt uncovering the past. "Someday I'll go to Egypt too," Jean-Francois told his brother as he sat spellbound, imagining himself with Napoleon making his own discoveries. When Jean-Francois was 11, he went to school in the city of Grenoble. There, his brother took him to meet a famous scientist who had been to Egypt with Napoleon. The scientist's house was filled with Egyptian treasures. Each one captured the boy's imagination. "Can anyone read the writing?" asked Jean-Francois. "No, no one," the scientist replied. "Then I will one day," said Jean-Francois, and he left the house full of enthusiasm, sure that he would be the first to discover the key to Egyptian hieroglyphs. Back home, his brother helped him to get down all of the books they had on Egypt. On moonlit nights, Jean-Francois stayed up reading long after he should have been asleep. His brother nicknamed him the Egyptian and bought him notebooks. Jean-Francois filled them with hieroglyphs. There were prowling lions, angry monkeys, trumpeting elephants, and sharp-eyed ibis birds with their long curved bills. He could not read the Egyptian words, but he dreamed that one day he would, as he sailed up the Nile. When Jean-Francois finished school at 16, his brother took him to Paris to meet the scholars who were studying a black stone from Rosetta, Egypt. The stone was covered with Egyptian and Greek words and told of a king of Egypt named Ptolemy. By reading the Greek, the scholars hoped to decipher the Egyptian, but the work was difficult, certainly too difficult for a boy, and the scholars turned Jean-Francois away. They did not see the fire burning bright in his eyes. They did not recognize the genius who had already learned all of the known ancient languages. They did not know that he was a seeker of knowledge who would not rest until he had found the answer. Jean-Francois gathered his notebooks and returned to Grenoble. There he taught school. His students often came to hear him talk about Egypt, her pharaohs and gods, and the mysterious writing. Once even Napoleon came to Grenoble, sat up all night listening spellbound as Jean-Francois told the great man of his dreams. Napoleon promised to send Jean-Francois to Egypt when he conquered the world. Napoleon dreamed of glory. Jean-Francois dreamed of discovery. But a few months later, Napoleon was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo. France was now defenseless. Her enemies poured in. They surrounded Grenoble and in the early mornings bombarded the city. Jean-Francois ran to save his notebooks from the flames. The people were angry with Napoleon and anyone who knew him. They pointed fingers at Jean-Francois and called him a traitor. He fled into the woods, leaving his notebooks behind. There he lived like a hunted dog. It was weeks before it was safe to come out, and months before he saw his notebooks again. During During these troubled times, scholars everywhere were racing to solve the mystery of Egyptian writing. Unbelievable things were said. Ridiculous books were written. No one had the answer. Then an Englishman discovered that a few of the hieroglyphs on the Rosetta Stone were letters, and he deciphered King Ptolemy's name. Everyone said that the Englishman would be the first to unlock the door to Egypt's past. Everyone except Jean-Francois. When Jean-Francois was 30, he gathered his notebooks and left Grenoble. He made his way back to Paris to his brother. In Paris, Jean-Francois studied the Rosetta Stone and other inscriptions. He compared the Greek letters with the Egyptian hieroglyphs and herded together his own alphabet of eagles and lions and dark-eyed chicks. But this wonderful list of letters was no help in reading the language. There were too many pictures he did not understand. What to make of a fish with legs, a jackal with wings, or an ibis god with a long curved bill? There had to be a link between these pictures and the Egyptian letters. But what was it? Jean-Francois slept little. He ate almost nothing. Then on September morning in 1822, Jean-Francois saw a small package on his doorstep from a friend in Egypt. In it were the names of the pharaohs copied from a temple wall. Each name was a jigsaw puzzle of letters and pictures. Jean-Francois studied the names and saw the link. The pictures were sounds too, not single letters, but syllables, even whole words. One of the names drew him. It began with a hieroglyph of an old silent friend perched on a sacred staff. This was a picture of the god of writing, Thoth, followed by the letters M and S. Thomies! Jean-Francois suddenly exclaimed, and the rushing sound of Pharaoh's name as if carried on wings across the centuries filled the room. Jean-Francois raced down the street to his brother's office. He burst through the door, exclaiming, "I have the key!" Then he collapsed. He had not eaten. He had not slept. For 5 days he lay near death. On the 5th day he awoke. "Pen and paper," he whispered, and wrote of his discovery to the world. People all over France celebrated his triumph as Jean-Francois became the first to translate the ancient writing and open the door to Egypt's past. A few years later, the people of France sent Jean-Francois to Egypt on an expedition to uncover more secrets. He knew Egypt so well in his mind that he felt he was going home. As Jean-Francois had imagined 1,000 times in his dreams, he sailed up the Nile. Once ashore, he entered the ruins of a temple. A magnificent flock of ibis suddenly rose from the reeds and took flight. Below, the ibis saw the seeker of knowledge touch the stone walls. His fingers dipped into the carved pictures. He pressed his ear to the stone and listened to the ancient voices. Jean-Francois Champollion lived only a few years after his trip to Egypt, but what he discovered was the beginning of Egyptology, the study of ancient Egypt. Jean-Francois' life was short, but it was full of passion for his work. After his death, his beloved brother Jacques-Joseph published his manuscripts. The Englishman in the story was Thomas Young. Some say that he was the first to decipher hieroglyph writing, but much of what he did was incorrect. His greatest contribution was to prove that cartouches contained royal names and that some of the hieroglyphs were sounds. As for Jean-Francois, what he discovered that September morning was only a part of what he found out about his fascinating writing. Not only did he figure out that the pictures were sounds, but he also discovered how some pictures at the end of the words became silent and how they seemed to make the words come alive. Intrigued? There are shelves of books waiting for you to explore. Deciphering hieroglyphic writing was difficult work, but it was work that Jean-Francois loved. His fascination with Egypt began when he was very young. Like you, he had dreams, and he spent his life making his dreams come true.